Well, perhaps a few things could be said about fairy tales very briefly. One is that the word fairy is derived from the Latin fata, which means fate and is at the root of other words like fatal and fairy. So these are stories about fate. It's important to know that because they're not about little creatures with wings that go flitting around. There aren't that many of those kinds of creatures in fairy tales, although there are lots of spinning women and fates in the stories. And they are a breed of story that has been with us since the beginning, as far as anyone can tell, of storytelling and the oral culture of telling stories. Maria Louise von Franz said that fairy tales may go back to 10,000 BC. They may be 10,000 years old, far older than we think. The other worlds, this other world that runs parallel to our world, that shows us, gives us a mirror of our predicaments in this world, has been with us for a long time. And these are stories that we find in China and Africa and South America and amongst indigenous people and amongst Europeans. It seems to be a human story. And you can find variants of stories like Cinderella all over the world, all over the world. Something about that story is very deeply embedded in the human psyche and is there for us when we are burned to the ashes and we're trying to rise out of the ashes. There is something in that story for us. Similarly with Beauty and the Beast, that kind of story when one is spelled into a form not your own. You're a frog or you're a beast or you're some horrible, more bestial version of who you know you really are. Those stories appear all over the world. And so, really, it's a question of what story is speaking to you. And we all find our way to different stories. And it's very, very fascinating to me to watch the journeys that other people take to stories and what the stories say to them and how they see themselves in the story and what they imagine between the lines of the story. Because although we can honor the lines of the story that have been carried down to us from our ancestors, it's really the adventure is to go in between the lines and use all your senses to say what you see and note what you're hearing and touching and feeling and observing between the lines of the story.